twilight, these sisters discuss the paranormal and the unnerving. They are known as the ParaSisters.
Hey guys, this is Tristan.
And it's Rebecca, your favorite.
You are watching and listening to the ParaSisters.
The ParaSisters.
Yep, because we're great.
Mm-hmm. Totes.
I forgot what I was going to say. Dang it. Anyway. We'll start out by saying if you guys like our content, like, share, and subscribe.
Turn on your notification.
Yes. So you always get our new stuff. Go anywhere you guys can get podcasts. You can get our podcast. It's awesome. I actually listen to other podcasters and they're like, we don't listen to our podcast, but I love listening to our podcast.
Because it's just that good.
I think it's great. I don't know.
Dude, I love I don't really listen to them because I listen to them as I edit them, so
right.
I don't usually go back and listen to them. Not that I don't think it's good, but
I do, but I'm always critiquing. So I'm like, I could have done this better, or I talked too long about this thing or something, you know.
See, this is my fear when I'm re-listening to things, is I'm like, after the fact, most of the time realize that I sound like an idiot sometimes. And I don't want it to be like, oh God, that's so cringy, and that's so cringy, and what was I thinking, and why did I say that? Like, oh, that's my life. The earring is stabbing me in the neck. Okay.
So, well, Becca bleeds to death from her earring.
Yes, it's punctured an artery at this point.
We are going to talk about Port Arthur, Tasmania, Australia.
Yes.
This place is fantastic. And just so you guys know, this is going to be a multi-parter. I don't know how many parts yet because I literally have pages of just like history.
Nice.
Yeah.
That's
so
nice.
this week, this part of the case, we're going to just talk about like it's like back history.
Oh, sweet.
Yeah, because so many things have happened here. This place is insane. So we're gonna just jump right in. Port Arthur. I'm excited too. I found this by accident, actually.
Sweet.
I've never heard of this place.
Me either.
Which is weird because it is so, like, there's so much going on.
You know what's weird is I have a couple of things that I want to maybe do in the future in Australia, and it's weird that I've never heard of this place.
Yeah.
Because I've specifically done research about places in Australia.
Right. So, Port Arthur is the most haunted town in the Southern Hemisphere.
Yes. Sounds like a place I need to be.
Me too. I want to go. This place is incredible. So Port Arthur started out as a penal colony.
Of course.
And for those who don't know what a penal colony is, it's where they send offenders where they have where they have nowhere to send them. They didn't want to put them in prison or whatever. So they send them to a penal colony. They kind of banish the prisoners.
Right. So, you know, back in the day, the prisons would fill up really quickly and they didn't have space. And plus, I think, what do they call it? Transportation? I don't remember.
Mm-hmm.
It was more severe punishment. But they would also...
Right, these are for multiple offender. Like a multiple offender. Well, I don't even know how to say that, but people who offended multiple times.
Right.
Like, because if you did it once, they would just throw you like in the Tower of London.
Yeah.
But if you did it multiple times, then they finally shipped you off to somewhere else. Right. While there are many prisons around the world that are infamous for their ghostly residents, Port Arthur totally beats all of them. And their story, it was inhabited before it became a penal colony, but And starting in 1776, because, you know, we won the war and Great Britain was no longer allowed to send their prisoners here.
Kicked your ass. Just kidding.
Yeah, they were. Well, we did. We're a free country now. They were no longer allowed to send their criminals here. You know, we're like, no, I don't think so.
Yeah, we don't want those mothers.
So, starting in 1776, thousands of prisoners were shipped to Port Arthur and left to die.
Nice.
Or, however, you know, they were shipped there and they were never allowed to return home. Port Arthur features every element of a good haunting, including child ghosts, a haunted hospital, random ringing bells, and a whole lot more.
Sweet.
Yeah.
Yes.
And this is just a little bit, like a little teaser, because we're going to get into the history and we're not to this part yet, but it's a little teaser of what's to come.
So pay attention and watch that later.
Yes. According to legend, the multitude of ghosts and spirits who call Port Arthur home are victims of the brutal conditions of the prison itself. This prison was awful. When it started, so this was in 1776, it was just a penal colony.
Right.
And then it eventually became a prison. The commandant in charge of the penal and prison system instituted a silent system.
What the F is
that? Where prisoners were forced to stay silent every hour of every day. Yep.
Every single 24 hours a day?
Yes.
No.
They were not allowed to speak to one another. They were not allowed to speak to the guards.
That's like cruel.
They had to, yes. This is a psychological punishment.
That's
they had
up.
they had to wear hoods over their heads and remain in isolation for 23 hours a day if they were not working. These conditions drove many prisoners insane.
Yeah.
So insane, in fact, that they eventually had to build an asylum. Yeah.
They're like, we've made our prisoners insane. Let's build an asylum, please.
Yeah.
Thank you.
In the prison itself, people have reported that certain prison cells have hold their former occupants depressed spirits in them, and you can feel that energy when you go into them.
Yeah.
They have heard moans and cries of the children prisoners.
Children?
They did have children prisoners, yes.
What is happening?
At one of the facilities, yeah, because they were separated. And in the officers' households, they experienced mysterious disturbances. Port Arthur seems to be the mecca of paranormal and chilling stories.
Interesting.
This place is crazy. So that's my little intro to this before we get into the little history, because you know me in history. I love to do some history.
Dude, I love history too.
As a matter of fact, I have 12 pages of history.
Listen, that's why I shy away from some subjects, because I know that the history itself is going to be so long, and then the like paranormal stuff's going to be like relatively short, and I'm like, oh, I don't know if I want to do that.
Well, the paranormal in this is actually very long. I'm going to try to combine, because after this happens, after the history happens, there is a significant event that takes place.
What?
Yes, and I'm going to try to combine that with the haunting history.
Oh, so I don't get to hear that today?
No, that's going to be in part 2.
All right, I quit.
The event... The event is you guys are gonna hear that in part 2. I'm gonna try to maybe do these back to back, if Rebecca doesn't mind.
Nope.
So, okay. I know you want to hear about it, so.
I know, so bad.
Okay, so Port Arthur is located about 97 kilometers, which is 60 miles, southeast of the state capital, Hobart, in Tasmania. on the Tasmanian Peninsula. I said that weirdly, peninsula.
Peninsula. You sounded very posh.
I did, didn't I?
Almost bougie.
I was bordering bougie. The scenic drive from Hobart via the Tasman Highway to Sorel and the Arthur Highway to Port Arthur. So you got to take a couple highways and you get to Port Arthur. It takes around an hour and a half to get there from Hobart. You can go here and it is open for visitors. It is a tourist attraction.
Yes, I love to hear that.
So while the prisoners were here, the only connection to the mainland is called Eagle Hawk Neck. And it's
it's funny name.
Yeah. Well, they call it neck because the Latin word for what this is actually called is super hard to pronounce.
Oh, right.
And it's technically that. And I didn't even put it in here because I was like, I'm never going to say that right.
You're like, I'm not even trying.
Well, I listened to it and like, you know, you can go to Google Translate and you can hear what it sounds like. I tried and I could not do it. So
Seriously?
I was like, I'm not going to even put it in there. Yeah, it's a weird word.
I might have to look it up.
Yeah. So this was the only connection to the mainland. This place was fenced and guarded by soldiers, man traps, and half-starved dogs. So you were not getting off this island.
Yeah.
You were not getting out of here at all.
What's a man trap?
I would assume it's like where they dig a pit and put the
spikes.
Yeah.
And then they cover it with like leaves.
I'm assuming that's what a man trap is. I'm not sure.
That's fucked up. I want to make one of those.
And people were not allowed to do whaling or fishing from the shore or ship-based around this island because they were doing this to prevent the convicts from escaping. Of course, yeah. Like commandeering the boats and escaping.
Yeah.
So this place was very guarded. You weren't allowed to do shit around the island. I mean, like, you couldn't even, like, sail up to the island.
Right.
Like, they would probably shoot your vessel down.
That's
true. So, the actual Port Arthur penal settlement began its life as a small timber station in 1830. Even though they started shipping people over there about 1777, 1778.
Right.
It became an actual settlement in 1830. And it started as a timber station, which was originally designed as a replacement for the recently closed timber camp at Birches Bay, which is pretty close to Port Arthur.
Right.
Port Arthur quickly grew in importance with the penal system of the colonies. So this is where the British decided they're going to send everybody now.
Right.
To this penal system.
The main place.
Right, where it used to be the Americas, you know. Right. I've actually, like, watched documentaries about history, and they're like, they're going to send us to the Americas, you know, and I'm like, this place is fantastic. What are you talking about?
Yeah, that's the best, like, literally the best thing that could happen to you, because when we're free,
right.
I bet you're going to be free, so it's fine.
Right, fight with us. You'll be all good.
Exactly.
So, the initial decade of settlement saw the penal station. They hacked everything from the bush. So, I didn't really understand what this means. I'm like, why are they hacking bushes? The bush is actually forest. That's what they call it.
Yes. Australians are very odd in their lingo.
They are, so I was like, I didn't understand why they were hacking the bushes. I'm like, why can't they just, like, bulldoze it?
You're like,
you
just,
know, get the horse,
just plow that shit over. What's going on?
Right, get the horse, get the buggy. I mean, come on, they're bushes. Because I was like, hacked is a very strong word to use for bushes.
Bushes, yeah, for bushes.
So I had to look it up, and it means forest.
That makes sense.
And the first manufacturers such as shipbuilding, shoemaking, smithing, timber, and brickmaking were established.
Smithing. You said smithing.
Smithing. The 1840s. In the 1840s, they consolidated the industrial, and the penal nature of the settlement as the convicts population reached over 1,100 at this point. So in 10 years, they had 1,100 convicts. So they're like...
That's a lot of criminals, like, really.
Right, it is. And they're like, hey, why don't we make the criminals do all this shit?
Yeah, why are we working? We got free labor right here. What's going on?
Free labor, exactly. In 1842, a huge flour mill and granary, which is later turned into the penitentiary, they started construction on that, as well as the construction of a hospital. So they're growing big in the 10, 12 years that they are officially a settlement. So they now are working on a mill, a granary, and a hospital. In 1848, they started building a separate prison to house all these people.
Right.
And they actually call it the separate prison. And the completion of this brought about a shift in the punishment philosophy from physical and mental subjugation. From physical to mental subjugation. So this is when they start the mental punishment. This is where they can't speak to one another. All they do is work, and while they're working, they can't talk. They're wearing hoods. This place is awful.
That seems extremely harsh. I'm like, I don't even know, like being in prison is one thing. Being in a prison on a place that you obviously aren't from is another thing. And then you're not even allowed to talk to people? Like,
yeah. Not even just people. You're not even allowed to talk to yourself. You cannot make noise.
That's fucked, man.
We'll get into it further, like what they even do to the prisons, so you cannot make noise. It's crazy.
Listen, I'd be crazy within, like, a week. Because I cannot stop talking. For real. Like, I could... they would kill me, or I would go insane, like...
Oh no! You don't get killed for talking. You get like 90 lashes.
Oh shit!
Yeah, it's insane. Like, these people were like the mastermind of mental punishment. Yeah,
that's crazy.
At this time, Port Arthur expands geographically, and they made the convicts like push, like get more timber, make it bigger. So they made the convicts push further into the encircling hills, and of course cut the timber because it's a timber place, right. Timber station. So after the American War of Independence, Britain could no longer send their convicts to America. So they were all transferred here. I already put that in there. I already talked about that. Dang it. I hate when I do that.
I do that too.
These men and women, because there were women and children here, these men and women were convicted of crimes that seem very trivial today.
Yeah.
Like, mostly for stealing small articles, livestock, stuff like that. But they had to have been convicted at least one time in England,
right,
to be sent here. If they did it again, then they were sent to the penal colony.
I mean, I think that's a good warning, but I mean, you also have to think, I'm sure these people stole out of necessity. I don't think they stole, jewels or something.
Right. And like, Britain's policy to treat these people so harshly is really bad.
It's British.
I know. I mean, like, a little child steals a loaf of bread because he's hungry.
Right.
Not because he's trying to be an asshole. He's hungry. And if he steals it again, he's sent to Australia.
That's terrible.
It is terrible. So the convicts sent here were most likely to be poor young people from rural areas or from the slums of the big cities. 1 in 5 was a woman, and numbers of children were also transported with their parents. So if their parents got sent, the children got sent, and few ever returned home.
Yeah.
So
I just want to throw it out there. Have you ever seen Quigley Down Under?
I have not.
With Tom Selleck. Oh my gosh. You have to see it. Like the whole thing is he goes down there for like a shooting. Like he's a really, really good like sharpshooter, and it's like the 1800s, you know. And it's just so good, and he meets like this crazy Cora, and she was sent there by her husband from somewhere. I think it was America probably, but it's so good. You have to watch it. You have to watch it. It's very good.
Before I continue on, isn't it crazy how men could send their wives to the insane asylum for no reason?
It's so fucked up. Listen,
or send them to prison.
This is something I deeply, because I am in love with history. If I could live in like the Victorian era, I would, or earlier even. But the idea that a husband had absolute control over his wife really upsets me. Like, I would never be able to live with that, honestly.
Right. I have to turn this light on. It's hard for me to see the paper.
It's only natural.
What'd you just say? Yeah, that's right. That's what I thought.
Hush up, Nessie.
Yeah, hush your Nessie mouth.
In the kitchen, make me some pie.
Fish pie. Nessie.
Of all the laborious occupations some convicts were forced to carry out during their time at Port Arthur, timber getting is what they call it. Timber getting was the most punishing.
Yeah, I can imagine that's hard work.
Oh, but the way that they had to do it is ridiculous. Okay, so it was also the most profitable for the island so that they could be self-sustaining, you know, and make money.
Of course.
From the very early days of the settlement, gangs of convicts cut timber from the bush surrounding the settlement. The saws of the convicts supplied a steady stream of building materials to fulfill the needs of works both on and off the peninsula. Like I said, they built ships.
Mm-hmm.
They started to build ships. They would send the stuff off to other, you know, timber places, and
right.
It was extremely profitable for Arthur. These trees were so enormous, actually much larger than the ones we find today.
Yeah.
I mean, I could only think about like the oldest forests of the world where the trees have never been touched.
Yeah.
When felled a saw pit, these trees were so big that they couldn't even cut them on the ground. So they felled the trees, and they had to dig a saw pit underneath of the log.
Right.
So that it could be cut up into smaller lengths of wood. 2 convicts were in the saw pit to cut the wood. One convict, called the top dog, stood on top of the log, while the bottom dog, worked in the pit at the other end of the saw. So you had one on top and one on the bottom, and they're both, you know, one of those big long saws. The bottom dog, his job was extremely uncomfortable because his eyes and his mouth would be filled with sawdust in his ears.
Well, yeah, I'm like, you're looking up at sawdust. Yep. That's fun.
Yeah, this is how big these section pieces are. When the log was cut into a rough beam, a gang of 50 convicts named the Centipede Gang hefted the great weight upon their shoulders and carried the timber back to the main settlement.
Holy crap.
Where here at the main settlement, in larger saw pits constructed near the water, the timber was cut up into the planks, beams, boards, and spars needed for building. So just to transport it, they had to dig a saw pit, cut it up into smaller pieces, then 50 people would have to carry this thing.
That's insane.
Yeah.
That's crazy. I'm just like, that's like every single person that works at my job, basically. We all would have to get together to carry a piece of wood.
All 3 of my taverns out here do not have 50 employees.
That's crazy.
Isn't it?
It's nuts.
I know. We have like 20. We don't even have half of that. And that's for 3 taverns.
That's crazy.
In 1841, the assignment system, which is where they sent people, to work and stuff, was replaced by that of probation. This saw the Tasman Peninsula. Why do I keep wanting to say it like that? Peninsula.
Say it again.
I know. Peninsula. I want to say it like, but it's peninsula.
Peninsula.
It was settled with 5 new stations, each of which had up to 600 convicts working at agriculture or merely serving time.
Wow.
So, that's 600. That's 3,000 inmates at this point.
Holy crap.
Yeah, because each new station, there's 5 new stations, and each station has 600 people.
Dang.
One probation station, because okay, so you leave the regular, this is your probation. So you go from the regular prison into one of these stations when you're on probation.
Right.
Probation, even though you're not free to do whatever the hell you want. Just check in with your probation officer. One probation station called the Cascades was settled with the primary focus of extracting timber from the north side of the peninsula. By 1846, the Cascades had replaced Port Arthur as the main timber producer in the peninsula. So this Cascades place, one of the stations, became huge.
Yeah.
And honestly, for my probation, I would not want to be sent to the Cascades. In 1850, they constructed a steam-powered sawmill and the laying of iron tramways so that they could increase production to like haul the wood. It made it easier to haul the wood to such an extent that by 1856, the area around the Cascades, the whole Cascades area, was completely stripped of useful timber. Yeah.
What is wrong with people?
I don't know. They're greedy.
Mm-hmm.
So with the closure of the Cascades, I can't talk today. Operations reverted back to Port Arthur. So Port Arthur now became the main timber yard again. The sawmill and the tramway rails were moved to Port Arthur, and a huge parcel of land was covered in saw pits next to the penitentiary, so it made it quicker for the guys to get to work.
Nice.
Yeah, let's just build the saw pits next to the penitentiary. They don't have long to walk.
It's extremely convenient and thoughtful.
But a good thing is that they built log slides.
Oh.
Yeah, which is pretty cool. I didn't know exactly what that was. So it's a long log-lined channel which timber can be slid down the hill.
Yeah.
So you just put the log in there and it slides down a hill. So the centipede gangs were no longer needed, and it enabled convict gangs to cut up the timber further from the settlement. So they could go out further and they wouldn't need these 50 guys to carry the stupid logs.
Right.
So the decade after 1856 was the busiest time for Port Arthur. However, the convicts were getting older and sicker because they're not bringing a whole lot more in. In the late 1860s, they could no longer work as well in the bush as they was been able. As at Cascades, the area had also been stripped of all of its useful timber, Up until the closure of Port Arthur in 1877, the old convicts were used to cut firewood, but they didn't have to cut down the big trees anymore. There's no more trees. They're all gone now.
They just chopped them all down.
Yes. In 1877, the area was given over to private interests, and as individual companies began logging in the area, often using the old convict tracks for support. So they just started going out further. They're being stupid. There was like no trees left.
Yeah.
On Port Arthur at all. One of the greatest problems facing the authorities of Port Arthur was balancing the need to punish these people against the need of being profitable, making it a profitable enterprise. Right. They figured, they're like, hey, the convicts can't spend their days getting flogged and rotting in a cell. They needed to be reformed through the combination of religion, education, and trade training.
Oh, yeah, that's nice.
But I want to tell you that very few of these people were ever reformed. Actually, most of them ended up dying.
Ugh, that's awful.
In 1834, shipbuilding was introduced to Port Arthur on a large scale. I mean, extremely large scale. Like, they produced so many ships out of here. And actually, 2 famous ships that served for over 40 years were produced in Port Arthur. One was called the Isabel, and she sailed for 40 years.
Nice.
Yeah. So the convicts, deemed well-behaved and receptive to training, were allowed to work at the dockyard. So up to 70 convicts were employed at the dockyard. At its height.
Employed, with the forced to work. It's all the same.
Right, which with the majority engaged in menial tasks of like cutting and carrying timber. The remaining convicts were the carpenters, the blacksmiths, the caulkers, the coopers, and the shipwrights who actually built the vessels. So all these ships that came out of Port Arthur were built by convicts.
That's kind of cool.
Yeah, it is cool. Though successful, the shipbuilding operations of Port Arthur ceased on a large scale in 1848. So it didn't run for terribly long, 14 years. But they did build a ton of ships.
I think it's pretty messed up to use prisoners to make money for yourself. Because obviously they didn't see any of the money, but they did all the work.
No, I mean, but they did feed them. You know what I mean? They did get fed once in a while. So
like we know you're breaking your back to make us millionaires, but here's some bread.
And these people were honestly probably thought that at one time that they would be, you know what I mean? They probably went here and they're like, okay, I'm gonna learn this good skill. I'm going to behave, and I'll eventually get out of here.
Yeah.
Not all of them were ever freed. Most of them were not.
That's despicable.
Yeah.
Especially considering the crimes. I'm like, I don't think they're crimes, obviously, unless they were like murderers or something, but it shouldn't be a life sentence. Like,
I agree. It's awful. The dockyard still exists to this day, and it's a short walk from the main settlement. Yeah, it's a huge like tourist attraction.
Dang, I want to go there.
The original master shipwrights residence is still there. And one of the original slipways is a later building, the Clerk of Works, which I don't know what that means because it's Australia. That is also still there. It's not as old as the other things there, but it's still there.
Clerk of Works.
Clerk of Works, yeah. I don't know what that means.
I don't know either.
They also one of the saw pits is still there, and the blacksmithing hut building, it's still there also.
Listen, I was literally just gonna look up the Clerk of Works, but when I opened a new tab, it came up on our on the recording.
I was looking at the paper. I didn't even notice.
Oh god! I was like, oh, close.
Throughout its operational life, Port Arthur struggled to reach an economically sustainable level of operation. And actually, it never did. It was just because they used the backs of convicts to make a profit, and they didn't actually think about being sustainable until later on.
Well, right. They're just like, let's do what we can now to make money, but they didn't think of the future.
Right. I mean, they did have some agricultural stuff where they did grow plants and things like that, but in an ideal world, the product of convict labor, sorry, would provide the raw manufacturing materials necessary for ongoing maintenance of the station and its occupants, but they sold all their shit off, so
right, they didn't keep anything for
right. And Stupid. I mean, because really, this place was only here for 100 years. I mean, the land was there for a lot longer, of course, and I'm sure that they had indigenous peoples there. But as a penal colony, it was only open for 100 years.
Yeah, that's not that long.
It's not that long. Because it like fettered out. They took everything they could from the land. They didn't really put a lot of thought process into putting back into the land.
Right.
And so they figured that they would provide all this raw material, but it didn't. In some regards, Port Arthur managed this with its flourishing timber industry. In some regards, it did not. Fueling building works throughout the peninsula. I don't know why I want to pronounce it like that. I know the word.
It's just like I couldn't pronounce alchemist. I just couldn't do it. Like even yesterday, I'm like, how do you say it again? And Andrew had to tell me, and I'm like, I don't know why. I don't know what's wrong with me.
Yeah. So the flour, that's me today. The meat, flour, and vegetables necessary for the rations for the convicts would also be sourced from the farms of Port Arthur and other peninsula stations. All outstations and probation stations had tracts of land that they could develop for these needs, like vegetables and stuff like that.
Right.
Saltwater River, which is a station, and Safety Cove Farm, they were the biggest agricultural stations open in the peninsula. Opened on this place, this island. It's almost an island. They also had a sheep station and for slaughtering. So they had sheep. They had mutton.
Yum.
Despite their clear aims, the main weight of the rations during the 1830s and especially the 1840s had to be shipped from Hobart.
Oh, right.
So, yeah, they just weren't producing enough. I mean, if they had stopped trying to cut wood for a while, maybe they would be able to.
It's weird because we've heard of a lot of places like sanatoriums and prisons where they were self-sustaining, like islands, basically. Not islands, but islands. And it's crazy that they didn't do that here when they had obviously the opportunity to, like.
Right. Like this place could have been good. Like when we talked about Tranquille, it was completely self-sustaining.
Right.
They actually supplied stuff to other places because they were so completely self-sustaining.
Mm-hmm.
But this place actually, well, I'll read on and you'll understand. Like their clear aims, the main weight of the rations during the 1830s and 1840s had to be shipped from Hobart. The 1841 introduction of probation saw the authorities facing almost insurmountable problems rationing the convict population. Yeah, as the population rose from close to 1,500 to over 3,500 convicts in 1844. Yeah, the convict just the convict population, the size of the convict population required over 2.5 tons of flour a day to fill the bread ration alone.
That's insane.
Yes. So the mill and the granary was supposed to supply the ones of the convict department, as well as produce surplus for export, but it did not. While they built the mill and the granary, the whole undertaking was completed by 1845, comprising a series of dams. The Port Arthur water-powered flour mill and granary had the first been suggested in 1939. They're like, hey, we're gonna run out of food. You guys need to help. We need to do something.
People need to eat. So
the suggestions of the colonial commissariat, I don't know, who governed the convict ration supply and Port Arthur commandant, saw the project start in 1842 and it was completed in 1845. They designed this place extremely poorly. So the mill was a grand failure. An engineer, Alexander Clark, was brought in to oversee the mill and granary construction. He was an engineer. Like, he was supposed to supply the water to the wheel. Like, that it was his job to figure out how to supply the water to the wheel to turn it.
Right.
It was hoped that it would, they wanted to do underground aqueduct and an overhead water raise. Getting the water to the 30-foot water wheel was unthinkably complicated. And much more complicated than anybody thought it was going to be. Right. The mill and the granary building was completed in just a year, but it took much longer for these aqueducts and the water raise system.
Right.
And it was a grand failure.
That's not surprising, really, at this point.
This whole thing sounds like a grand failure.
Yeah.
The infrastructure bringing the water to the wheel proved to be too complicated. Losing the water to seepage and evaporation, because it is Australia, it is hot as hell, and and the supply of the water that they were feeding in was completely inadequate to feed the wheel. In the end, the mill only operated in intermittent bursts, quickly using up any store of water accumulated in the dam. Only a decade after it was first built, the mill was gutted, and between 1854 and 1857, it was converted into the penitentiary.
That's crazy.
Yes, which became Port Arthur's most enduring landmark. It still stands today. You can go in there, and you can go into the cells.
Nice.
In 1853, they ceased transportation. You were right, it's called transportation. So this resulted in fewer transportees arriving in the station. However, since Port Arthur was one of the few secondary punishment stations operating in the colonies, it still received a large portion of the colonial sentenced men, as well as all transportees was still in the system. So, yeah. So like even though they were getting fewer, Port Arthur still got the majority of the people transferred in.
Right.
And this place was awful. During the 1860s, Port Arthur entered what has become known as its welfare phase. This period saw the construction of the Paupers Depot and the asylum. The result of an aging and increasingly infirm prisoner population. These were the centers of Port Arthur's somewhat benevolent leanings. Like it's this like, all right, you guys are old and you're sick, and we understand now you've gone insane because you haven't been able to speak to each other in 15 years. So
they're like, oh shit, we know you were sent here for stealing a loaf of bread, so you know.
Yeah, so here's an asylum.
Oh, you'll like it here. You can actually talk.
And then, right, and because they cease transportation. Another result of the aging prisoners was that the profitable convict-driven industries like timber getting and agriculture took a downturn.
Of course,
big cries.
You don't have free labor anymore, so.
Right. The asylum was built next to the separate prison at the southern extremity of the site, so like at the furthest southern part of the peninsula.
Right.
And it was built like in a classic asylum form that they built in the 1800s. In a, like, you know what I'm talking about? Like it has like the ones that go out to the side.
Yeah.
Yeah. Like, so it has like separate wings with a main building.
Yeah.
And this building was flanked by two L-shaped buildings comprising of the keeper's quarters and the bakehouse. To the rear was a long wooded building which served as a separate apartments for the asylum's more rowdy occupants. So it's like a solitary confinement for the crazy ones.
Yeah.
The front of the asylum was trimmed with an open veranda, which fronted out onto a large fenced garden replete with paths and ornamental plantings. So it was very grand.
What do these crazy people need this for?
I don't think it was for the crazy people. I think it was just for the people who weren't crazy, like the workers, the officers.
I'm like, you've already ruined their lives. Yeah. There's no point in giving them a garden, okay?
Right.
Like...
In keeping with the era, because this is the 1800s, treatment for the patients, many suffering from depression and or a mental disability, was rudimentary at best. Like, they just didn't give a shit.
So why even, like, they should have just let them go free, I guess, at that point. Because, like, why? Right. What's even the fucking point?
Now they've turned them insane because they weren't allowed to talk to each other.
Right.
So the convict patients were provided with a soothing atmosphere where they were allowed exercise and mild amusement.
I don't even know what that means. Like, oh gosh. Like, here's a book. Read a book.
Right, mild amusement. I think they could, like, play, like, board games maybe, or cards or something like that.
They could probably talk to each other again.
Right. Yeah, probably that's our mild amusement. They can speak like 5 words a day.
You're allowed to talk. Go ahead. Oh, jeez.
Work, though limited, was mainly tending gardens or chopping firewood, so they were allowed to work if they wanted to. After the closure, the asylum was severely damaged in 1895 by bushfires. And since then, it's gone through various incarnations as a schoolhouse, a town hall, and a museum.
A schoolhouse? They had kids in there?
Yeah.
That's freaky.
The 1850s and 1860s were years of remarkable activity for this place. It aimed to make the station economically sustainable.
Right.
Oh, never mind. I already read that part. I just forgot to delete it out of my paper.
Yeah, it happens.
The pulse of energy, however, was not sustained, and the 1860s shuffled into the 1870s, and the settlement began to enter its final days. The numbers of convicts dwindled. Those remaining behind were too aged, infirm, or insane to be of use. Yeah. Insane. The settlement that had hummed with life slowly ground to a standstill, and the last convict was shipped out in 1877.
But
they sent them elsewhere.
I was like, where'd they take them? Like, you're out.
They sent him to another penal colony, probably, or maybe they just kind of let him loose. I don't know.
I kind of hope so, as long as they weren't like killers or rapists.
Right. I would say that for the most, because Britain was not shy about capital punishment.
Yeah, that's true.
So I'm assuming that if you killed somebody, you were just hanged.
Yeah, probably. That's probably true.
So we're going to get into the reputation and perception part of Port Arthur. When Port Arthur was built, when they decided for that to become a penal colony, it was like touted, like sold as an inescapable prison, much like Alcatraz. Some prisoners were not discouraged by this and tried to escape anyway.
They're like, I don't believe you.
A prisoner named Martin Cash successfully escaped along with 2 others. One of the most infamous incidents, simply for its bizarreness, was the escaped attempt of George Billy Hunt. Hunt disguises himself as in a kangaroo hide.
Shut up. No. I don't even believe this story.
He wraps a kangaroo hide around himself, and he tries to flee across the neck, which has the half-starved dogs, the guards, the man pits, and fence.
In a kangaroo
but the guards, in a kangaroo hide, yes.
Oh, I love this guy. He's my hero.
The guard... this is awful, though. Listen. But the half-starved guards, because the guards were also starving. It's not just the convicts that were starving. The guards were starving also. The guards on duty tried to shoot him, thinking that he was a kangaroo, so they could supplement their meager rations. When Hunt noticed that that they were siding him up and they were going to try to shoot him.
They're going to eat you.
Threw off his disguise and got 150 lashes for trying to escape.
Oh, that's not that bad, at least. At least he wasn't eaten.
100. At least he wasn't shot. But I mean, at this point, 150 lashes is awful.
Yeah, I don't even know. They must have had somebody taking turns doing that. Like, that's quite a bit of lashing.
Yeah. The inmates of Van Diemen's Land, which is on Port Arthur, that's where the separate prison is located. They endured a silent, lonely psychological torture, which we've already talked about. Okay, so this explains it. I've read this and I totally spaced it. When it opened in 1848, the English Empire was moving away from corporal punishment, instead forcing convicts to quietly reflect on their past deeds in isolation.
Go think about it in the corner.
Right. This approach was dreamed up by reformists who believed physical punishment was hardening convicts and making them more likely to reoffend. This is a quote from a University of Tasmania PhD candidate, Honey Dower. She says, it was a prison discipline that operated under the principles of isolation, silence, and control. She also says that significant evidence that suggests there is a connection between solitary confinement and decreased mental health, which is not true. This place was so bad. I'll get into it. Miss Dower tracing the lives of convicts through historical documents, including obituaries and contact records of those who spent time in the separate prison. The prisoners had to study and attend chapel, and when outside their cell, they had to wear a hood to hide their faces. They were not... Yeah, they had no names. They were just numbers.
Oh, that's sad.
They weren't allowed to keep... not allowed to communicate with anyone, and they were no longer called by their name, only a number. It was a silent place. It was so silent that when they built the penitentiary and the separate prison, they laid mats in the corridors so even footsteps went unheard.
What? This is crazy.
Yeah. I mean, this place was silent. Could you imagine living somewhere like that?
No.
Despite its reputation as a pioneering institution for the new enlightened view of imprisonment, Port Arthur was still in reality harsh and brutal as any other penal settlements around at that time. Some critics even suggest that its use of psychological punishment, compounded with no hope of escape, made it one of the worst places to be. Some suggest, and it has been said, that prisoners committed murder, an offense punishable by death, just to escape the desolation of life at the camp.
Oh, that's kind of sad.
They have a place here. It's called the Isle of the Dead. Was the destination for all who died inside the prison camps. There are 1,646 graves recorded to exist there. That's just the recorded graves. There may be some who are not recorded. Only 180 of those are prison staff and military personnel. Those are the only ones that are marked. Everybody else's are unmarked.
Oh, that's so sad.
Isn't it sad? It's awful. And that's where I'm going to end it today because...
What?
Yeah. Oh, wait. Hold on. I had another page. I have another page. Just kidding. I'm not ending it yet.
Jokes.
So after the prison was closed, this is kind of like more recent history. After the prison was closed, much of the property was put up for auction. However, most of the property wasn't sold until about 1890. But by this time, the area had become increasingly popular, and the prison buildings were in decay, of course, because it's closed since 1877.
Right.
The actual Hobart Mercury, who is the founder of Hobart, the city, said the buildings themselves are fast going to decay, and New Year's will attract nobody, for they will be in ruins without anything to make them worthy of respect or even remembrance. So it was his idea to open it up for tourism.
I guess good for him.
Yeah. The decay was seen as something positive, as the Tasmanian population wished to distance themselves from the dark image of Port Arthur. They didn't want anything to do with it.
They're like, let's forget it.
Yes, and those who did purchase, which I am not for tearing down things or forgetting about things, because history is what makes us.
Yeah.
All historical things that's our ground. That's our foundation. Mm-hmm. And even if it's bad history, I think that it should be remembered as bad history. Those who bought Port Arthur property began tearing down the buildings. And then, of course, the destruction was furthered in 1895 and 1897 by bushfires, which destroyed the old prison house and a couple other things. The asylum went, and it was mostly destroyed by fires. In place of the prison, Port Arthur, the town of Carnarvon was born. Carnarvon. The town was named after a British Secretary of the State, and the population was said to be refined and intellectual. So where the prison was, it turned into this town. The town brought many visitors as they encouraged boating, fishing, and shooting in the natural beauty of the peninsula. they again wish to remove the negative connotation attached to the area. So they're like, hey, look at this beautiful place. In 1927, tourism had grown to the point where the area's name was reverted to Port Arthur. They turned it back to Port Arthur. In 1960, the Scenery Preservation Board was established to take the management of Port Arthur out of the hands of the locals. So it became like a national thing.
Right.
By the 1970s, the National Parks and Wildlife Service began managing the site. So now it's a National Parks and Wildlife Service place. In 1979, funding was received to preserve the site as a tourist destination due to its historical significance, which I love.
Yeah, that's awesome.
The working elements of Port Arthur communities, such as the post office, municipal offices, were moved to nearby Nubina. And several sandstone structures built by the convicts working under hard labor conditions were cleaned of ivy overgrowth and restored to a condition to their similar appearance in the 19th century. Buildings include the model prison, the guard tower, the church, and the remnants of the main penitentiary. The buildings are surrounded by lush green parkland, and they preserve the mass graves on the Isle of the Dead. So, yeah. They're trying to fix it, or they tried to fix it up. They did fix it up, and it's a huge tourist attraction. But in my next part, we're going to talk about an incident that happened in the early 90s.
What?
And yeah, and then we're going to get into the spooky stuff.
Yes. Can't wait.
The very, very spooky stuff. Yes.
I can't wait. And if you can't wait, make sure you like us and subscribe us. Subscribe us? Is that a word? I don't think so. Subscribe to us.
Subscribe to us.
Just subscribe us. It's fine. Dude, I'm so
neither one of us
excited.
can talk today.
I never can talk.
I am too. There's so much history. Like, I wanted to get through the history because I knew that it was going to take a little while, because I literally have 12, 13 pages of history here.
Dude.
Some of it I kind of just glossed over because wasn't really like pertinent information to this. But I just wanted to get it through that this place for a long time was a prison, and it was an awful prison.
Yeah, I don't know. I'm kind of like on the fence about prisoners. I definitely don't think they should be treated like slaves, but I think some people deserve to be in prison. Some people don't.
I agree.
It doesn't.
And if it warrants it, I believe in capital punishment. If it warrants it,
dude, I'm absolutely for capital punishment. Although
I would not want to be the one to judge that.
I mean, yeah, that's a whole nother thing, right? So it's funny because I feel like I could be on the jury and convict someone, and
it depends on what it's for. It depends on what it's for. You know what I mean? No, you're not. Because I believe in capital punishment, but I don't know. It's a gray area.
I mean, I would definitely never have a problem. I think that child molesters should be sent to death, and
I agree.
I think murderers should be put to death, and I would be the one to I could judge those people.
Rapist.
With my peers, yep. my 11 other peers, of course, but
sassy or not sassy, and Nessie's in the background saying rapist, and I agree.
Yeah, rapist. I mean, rapist, yes, absolutely. But I think that there are any crimes against children. I think you should never get another chance because you don't deserve it, honestly.
Right. I don't think that anybody who doesn't give somebody a chance to live deserves to live.
Exactly.
Why should they have a chance?
Right. That's what I don't this is a whole nother discussion, of course. But I don't understand people that are against capital punishment because, I mean, how could you possibly look at a family of someone who's been tortured and murdered and say, well, he deserves to live? I'm like, what? What? No, he does not deserve to live.
I agree.
But, there are those rare cases where the people are completely innocent and, maybe they don't deserve to go to death, obviously, but...
Right. Well, see, and that's the whole thing, because if you kill somebody or they say you killed somebody and you're innocent, you don't just, like, the next week go to death row.
Not nowadays. Back in the day, it was a very, very quick process. If you were convicted, you're pretty much within at least 2 years, you're done, so... But they've changed that with appeals and all kinds of stuff. So
right. So nowadays, you know what I mean? Like you could have a chance to prove your innocence. I'm not saying that always happens, but there is a chance there because you are on death row for like 10 years or something like that before.
There are literally people that have been on death row for like 30 years. Playing like they're going through appeals to this day, even though they've been convicted, in the 70s or early 80s. Like it's crazy. There are a lot of fail safes to make sure that people that are innocent don't get put to death. But
yes,
I don't know. Have you ever seen Making a Murderer? On Netflix.
I've seen it on there. I have not watched it. Is it good?
I would highly recommend watching this. It's briefly a guy in the 80s is convicted of a rape and he goes to prison for like 20 years and then DNA evidence proves that he was innocent. So he gets out and then all of a sudden a woman disappears and they're basically trying to say he did it. But it's very crazy because to me, it doesn't seem like he actually did it. It seems like he is trying to be, they're trying to pin it on him because he has like this huge lawsuit against the county that arrested him and imprisoned him. And it's very suspicious, but it's so good. I recommend everybody watch it. It's so, so good. If you love true crime, this is it, man.
I do. I love true crime.
That's it.
So anyway, you guys stay tuned for the next part of Port Arthur, Tasmania, Australia. Yes. It's going to be a good one. It's going to be better than this one. This one was mostly just the history of the place. We'll get more into the prisoners, their lives, the crime that they committed, what happened to them on the island.
Interesting.
Or the peninsula.
The peninsula.
And we'll get into the event that happened, and we'll get into the hauntings.
Dude, I'm so excited to hear about this event.
Yes.
I can't wait.
I'm not excited. I know what the event is, so I'm not excited about the event because it's actually awful, but...
Now I'm even more intrigued.
Yeah, it's an awful event.
I love awful events.
But it connects with the hauntings a little bit, I think. So,
yeah, that's awesome, and I can't wait. And you guys make sure you watch this and watch our next one. Go back and watch all of our videos. Watch them all.
Yes, we now have 2 videos with over 1,000 views on them.
Yes, Tranquille and Skidmore, Missouri.
Yep.
So go and watch those. They're good ones. But watch all of our videos because they're all good. And
they are good, yes.
If you don't feel like seeing our faces, that's fine. Go listen to our podcast. That's great too.
Yes, and check out our new website. As
the link.
It's freaking fantastic.
Yeah, the link's always in the bottom now of the video. And of course, check out that Jim Harold episode where I'm on there, which I still haven't listened to. I doubt I ever will.
It was great. It was great. I loved it. You were not cringy at all.
I probably won't listen to it.
You really weren't. Yeah, you should. It's really good. Me and Sassy and Grandma Sassy, we all watched it, or we all listened to it together. It was really, really
good. Oh my God. I don't know. Anyway, go and listen to that because Jim Harold always puts on a good... he's a good host. He tries his best with what he's got. So
Yes.
Sometimes the material's not there, but he's good. Anyway, so go do that. And I'm right now deciding that I want to start a fund to visit Port Arthur. So
yes.
So somebody please fund our trip to Port Arthur.
Yeah, give us I think we only need 1,000 more views total and we can be monetized.
I know, we just need those views. People need to watch our other video. I mean, watch the ones, but watch all of them. And like us, give us thumbs up. And of course, share us with all your friends and your family that like this kind of stuff.
Yes. So that way we can do what we want to do and what we love to do. We want to go to these places. We don't just want to talk about it on YouTube. We want to do full-on investigations.
Dude, I want to get a bus and travel the country and eventually the world. I mean, this is my legitimate goal is I want to see the spooky places of the world. So
yes.
But we're broke asses, so we need the money.
Yes, I agree.
Oh, it's broke ass people. Okay. Anywho, I guess that's it. We're done. We're done for today.
We're done. Sorry, I gotta love you, Kitty, and I gotta let her do what she's gonna do or else she won't stop.
This is awkward. No, I'm just kidding. Cats are so weird. Anywho, no.
This one's super weird. This Mochi, she's super weird.
No offense to people that own cats. It's fine. I don't care.
Don't step on my computer.
Aw, she's cute. Oh, if you love the kitty, give us a thumbs up. And I guess we'll catch y'all on the flip side.
Yes, and you all stay creepy.
Peace out, Mochi.